Right. Snap. It's brilliant this evening to see that there's at least three groups of people who've come to the talk this evening because of personal links to Snap. It's really great that a place that disappeared over 100 years ago still have people who care for it and who, if they don't remember it, they at least have a family memory of it, which is excellent. And I've just touched something and it's traveled on for me without expecting it. So this evening, what I'm going to talk about the origins of Snap, of the settlement and where it got its name, its early history, maybe earlier than some of you might expect. A rather special day when the Civil War passed it by. Snap Farm, who owned the farm and when. Some of them are quite interesting. And the one thing which has made Snap known is the population rise and its decline, and the reasons why the population declined to the point where it was finally abandoned. It had a school, it had chapels, plural, a church and a chapel. And then we'll talk about its final desertion, a rather strange aftermath. But first of all, I'm going to just take a quick 200-mile diversion to explain perhaps why the study of Snap has meant something personal to me. And the reason is I have a particular interest in abandoned villages. My connection is with a village called Hall Sands, which is very near the southernmost point of Devon. There is an early drawing of it. Subsistence fishermen living right on the shore by Start Point. I say that Hall Sands is there. Well, it isn't anymore. Since the 26th of January, 1917, there was a storm and 24 of the 25 houses in the village were completely washed away. It was totally destroyed overnight on the 26th of January, 1917. And nobody was killed. They were all aware that the storm was coming and they were all worried about what it might do. So everybody was ready and prepared for it. But that is yet another abandoned village, abandoned in the 20th century. So Snap has a sort of personal connection to me. Where is it? I've heard somebody today saying they don't know where Snap is. Well, here it is. If I can make this, give me a little laser pointer. This is the road out of Aldbourne towards Ogbourne St. George. Here's Ogbourne St. George. And you go along the long straight beyond Dudmore Lodge, and you come to Wood's End, and where the road bears away to the left, and what used to be Cheldine, and finally down the hill to Ogbourne. If you will see signs there telling you that you're at the entrance to Snap Farm. Well, I have to tell you that's a fib, because you're not. You're actually at the entrance to Lee Farm, which nowadays they've renamed Snap. Snap Farm was further on and down here into the valley, right in the bottom of the valley was Snap Farm and its cottages that serviced the farm. It's been occupied since the very earliest times. We've had finds there from the Bronze Age, right the way through medieval finds, archaeology, metal detecting finds and so forth in the area. So certainly it's been occupied for a good many thousand years. There's a medieval field system, which is marked on the map here. There are shadings on the map, or if you look at a photograph, you can see shadows of previous field lines in the center of the picture there. So it was farmed in medieval times. What about the name? Snap, S-N-A-P, as though it's a card game, that seems to have turned up in the 19th century. Older forms of it put an E on the end, so Snape or Snappy with double P's and with an E or without an E. And Snap, apparently, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, is Southwest dialect for a boggy region or a spring or a boggy place in a field. And if you go there, or if you went there a couple of months ago, you'd have found something like this, and you'd have seen exactly why it was called a boggy place in a field. Now, when does it first appear in writing? When I gave this talk in 2017, I confidently said the first mention is 1268, when there's a first written mention of Snape. Well, work that Cassie has done recently proved me wrong. There's a manorial survey, a survey of the manor of Aldbourne in 1617. And there was a dispute over lands which were held by a gentleman called William Goddard, the Goddard family that we all know of. Sorry, I've got something. That's right, let's get rid of that and move it out of the way. Covering half of my screen here, that's much better. Yes, so there was a dispute over the land that was held by William Goddard, and he claimed that he'd held it a long time because he had this ancient charter, and he produced an ancient charter at this meeting, at this court in 1617. And here is the record of in the court minutes where it's referred to. It's a sale of land to John Goddard by William Longspay, Earl of Salisbury. And William Longspay died in 1226. So the document that he brought to that meeting in 1617 must have been dated prior to 1226. So we've moved the origins or the name of Snap back 50 years from what we thought 10 years ago. So not 1268 at all, but 1226, the first name. We next find it in 1332 in a tax list. And there were 6 households. There was William Alfridge, William Searle, John Palmer, John Child, Walter Goddard, the Goddard family there, of course, And there was a little inconsequential chap called John Dymond. 1377, the poll tax. And now from the numbers, I can see that it includes Woodsend. There are 25 poll tax players, so that's 25 households in Snap. And there are 40 households at Woodsend. Now there are what, 5, 6 households in Snap? Not many more. 1509, we know that there are 5 households or 5 landowners in Snap, because we know that from this document, which you'll find a copy in the Heritage Centre, which is a rent roll for the first year of King Henry VIII from 1509. And there we can see at the top, we have Snap. Believe me, that's what that says. And then in Latin, it tells us that Johannes Yate holds a virgate of land, blah, 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 and so on. There's a list of the various householders there and the land that they hold. Go away. What's that? The land that they hold, and also these figures at the end of the rent that they pay. So he pays 10 shillings a year for the land that John Yate, for that piece of land, and for all of the land he holds 20 shillings a year. We have an image of Snap from 1598. First time it's appeared on a map. Probably the first map that's ever been produced of that area anyway. Blow up that bottom left-hand corner, and we can see here Snap. And this is the farm run by somebody called Scory. And you can see the cottages dotted either side of the lane. If you compare that with the modern map we saw earlier, you have to remember that they hadn't got the convention then that north was at the top. And on this map, north is on the right. So this line of the street of Snap is running roughly west-east, despite the fact that it's vertical on the map. Sleepy place, off the road, 20 houses, keeping to themselves, nothing going on, nice bucolic place to live. And then one morning, 18th September 1643, the ground shaking. There's a steady beat. Boom, 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 boom. And a huge convoy of men come marching past, armed with pikes and goodness knows what. It's the army. Where are we? Of Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex. And it's the parliamentarian army returning after relieving the siege of Gloucester and wanting to return to London and trying to keep off the roads. And so they'd come over the hill from Chiseldon through Snap and were making their way along the valley underneath Dudmore Lodge towards Aldbourne. And their target for the night, their destination for the night was to be Littlecote House, where General Popham controlled had a garrison, a very large parliamentarian garrison. And so the parliamentarian army is marching down this valley and round this slight bend here under Dudmore Lodge until it gets to around where Lower Lodge Barn is today, under Highclere plantation, when they're surprised by 2,000 Royalist cavalry who've been hiding over the hill at Upham. Their scouts had found the parliamentarian army, and so Prince Rupert of the Rhine. Is that going to work? No, I have to do it like that. Prince Rupert of the Rhine, leading his 2,000 cavalry, had spotted them, and he then attacked the rear of the column heading towards Littlecote. But before he let his men loose on the parliamentarian army, he sent 2 of his fastest riders to Oxford to warn the king where the parliamentarians were. And that proved a master stroke, because the following morning, when the parliamentarian army moved on from Littlecote towards London, they found the Royalist army arrayed across their route. And that gave us the first Battle of Newbury. But anyway, here at Aldbourne, there was a bit of a battle down through that skirmish, really. And the Royalists chased the parliamentarian army down through Aldbourne. Coming through Aldbourne, for some reason, the parliamentarians had decided that they weren't going to be able to get their 2 wagons of gunpowder to Littlecote, and they didn't want it to fall into Rupert's hands. So somewhere, supposedly in the village of Aldbourne, but I don't know where it could have been, but they blew up their 2 wagons, gunpowder. They kept their 2 cannon, which they had with them, but they fled down the road towards Littlecote. And Rupert let them go because he knew that once he got within range of the garrison at Littlecote, that he would be at a disadvantage. 170 years later, 1815, when they were creating the turnpike from Swindon to Hungerford, or as we like to call it, the B4192, workmen discovered a mass grave of about 15 skeletons that very likely were the casualties from the Battle of Aldbourne Chase. Oh, I've gone through without some illustrations that I meant to tell you. Now, back to bucolic, nothing happening, just running the farm, life, traveling, just as peaceful as normal. But only a few years. A few years after the Civil War, we begin to find out who owned Snap, the estate of Snap. So it's the farm and the houses and the whole area of Snap. It had been part of the manor of Aldbourne, which was held by the Duchy of Lancaster, in other words, by the king. But in the 1620s, the debts of King James, added to the additional debts that his son Charles I created, meant that King Charles I had to pay off some of his debts. And as part of that payment to the City of London, Aldbourne, the manor of Aldbourne, was handed to the City of London. The City of London don't really want a lot of land. What they want is money to replace the money that they lent to King James and King Charles. And so they started to sell off stretches of the manor. And one of them, they'd sold off the estate of Snap, of Upham and Snap. And at some point, I've not found the date precisely when, Upham and Snap were bought by a gentleman called Obadiah Sedgwick. There's a good name, Obadiah Sedgwick. Now, Obadiah was born in Marlborough in 1600. We know quite a bit about Obadiah Sedgwick, because he was the son of John Sedgwick, who was the vicar of St. Peter's in Marlborough, and he was also the vicar of Ogbourne St. Andrew. Obadiah was a Puritan preacher, definitely on the parliamentarian side, a Puritan preacher. And during the interregnum, he became what was known as a trier for the protectorate. And the triers were a panel of Puritans, basically, who interviewed and vetted priests who were put forward for the livings of parishes across England. And they were vetted to make sure that their views aligned with parliamentarian views and Puritanist views. And one of that panel was our friend Obadiah Sedgwick. As well as that panel, there was another panel who vetted the incumbent vicars around the country. And they were called the ejectors. And not only was Obadiah Sedgwick a member of the triers panel, he was secretary to the ejectors as well. So you can imagine the kind of view he had of Christianity and of the Christianity that King Charles I might have propounded. Added to all of this, he was also rector of St. Paul's in Covent Garden. And he died in Marlborough early in January 1657-58. This is a double date like that is because before 1752, the year number only changed on March the 25th. So December the 31st was followed by January the 1st of the same year. The year changed at the end of March. But that's anyway, he died. And in his will, oh, wait a minute, we've got a picture of him. There we are. There is Obadiah. Now, fine, upstanding gentleman. In his will, he instructed his wife as executor to sell Upham and Snap to pay for all of the monetary legacies that he left to lots of other people. So his wife was left, as we'll see in a moment, with the business of selling off Upham and Snap. Very strange gentleman, Obadiah. There are his books. He has quite considerable writings, and they're still in print today. You can buy books by Obadiah Sedgwick. And friend of mine, Bruce Fox, who's very much involved in history of Ogbourne St Andrew, he was in the church one day in Ogbourne St Andrew when when a group of very tall young men in dark grey suits came into the church. And when he asked them what they were doing and what they wanted, they said, we're looking for the grave of Obadiah Sedgwick, who is indeed, he's buried in the chancel of Ogbourne Church. Why are you interested in Obadiah Sedgwick? Well, we're his followers. And to this day in the Netherlands, they were Dutch. There are sects which follow the teachings of Obadiah Sedgwick to this very day. So anyway, Priscilla, his wife, hang on, something's not working. What's going on? That's better. Priscilla, his wife, was left with the job of selling Upham and Snap. And here is the bill of sale, the indenture of sale of Upham and Snap. And I'm conscious that I'm going quite slowly through this, I have to speed up. This is the sale of Upham and Snap by Priscilla Sedgwick and Obadiah Sedgwick, the son of Obadiah Sedgwick. And that's the 17th day of March in the year of our Lord, 1654. And they sold it to a gentleman called Gabriel Martin of Hayden. And Hayden Farm was on the hill between Snap and Upham. It was just literally 200 yards up the hill. But they sold Upham and Snap to Gabriel Martin. And there, I think if we go a little bit closer still, somewhere there we can see Snap. Oh, Upham and Snap, there we are, exactly, right there. And here we can see Priscilla Sedgwick. Yes, in the parish of Ogbourne, exactly. The fact that her name was Priscilla rang some bells with me early on in this research. I thought, oh, that's a name that's seen around the village. I wouldn't say frequently, but yeah, it's a name. It is a village name, Priscilla, or it was at that time. I wonder who she was. Oh, put that to one side. I've I've skipped a little nugget. Let's go back. A typical document of the time, indenture of the time, which is what this is, would have a wavy top to the document, because the idea was that there were two documents written back to back, and you then cut a wavy line between them, and the two parties would have exact copies. And to prove that they really were copies, you could put them back together and the waves would match exactly. So that's where we get the name indenture, because of these indentures would be. But at the bottom of an indenture, the margin was always folded up. And if you can look here, they would cut two slots and they would run a tape through the slots. And then the loose ends of the tape is where they would place the wax seal that sealed the document. And that was part of, you sign and seal a document. Well, that's how they attach the seals. So these documents would have wavy tops and they would always have the bottom turned up, and it would be blank under there. But if you look, you can see that there's something written there, and that's something quite fun. Remember, this is 1657. This is after the return. Well, this is during the interregnum, during the Commonwealth. A few years later, King Charles II comes back. They get rid of Cromwell and Richard Cromwell. Is it Richard, the son? They get rid of him and bring back Charles II. And this is royal land. And the king now says, hang on a minute. Hang on a minute. This was my land. When I sold this, I reserved the right for a rent of so much per year. And you've done this sale without making any consideration for that. And so he said, hang on, this is, I could, let me see if I can work out a way. Where are we? There we go. Yeah, here we go. It says memorandum that because this deed was made without any consideration to the king, notwithstanding the land thereon contained, are parcel of the possession of the Duchy of Lancaster, out of which of the farm of Hayden, whereon the premises are parcel, the king must have allowance, because upon his conveying in fee farms, he reserved £8, 4 shillings and 4 pence yearly. And so they owe £8, 4 shillings and 4 pence for every year since 1657. And the king wants his money. Because the sale had happened during the Commonwealth, of course, that hadn't been forthcoming. So, little aside, nothing really to do with Snap, but it's just fun. And now I need to go back here so that it now works again properly. Priscilla, I was talking about Priscilla. Sometime after I gave the talk in 2017, we came upon a will. The will of Edward Goddard from 1667. And Edward Goddard, in his will, he leaves some property which I lately bought of my sister, Mrs. Priscilla Sedgwick. So we know that Priscilla was actually Priscilla Goddard. And it was Priscilla Goddard who married Obadiah Sedgwick. So tying again families together. And again, this was again land in Snap that they were dealing with in Edward's will. It got sold down again to James Stone in 1720. I'm not going to go into that, take my word for it. That's another of those huge indentures, and you can see the seals there at the bottom and the folded up bottom margin. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to jump over that one. The next time that we come to Snap is the enclosures of 1809. And in 1809, John Neat was the landowner of Snap. He was also the holder of the parsonage or rectory here in the village. But the tenant who actually operated the farm was John Reeves. Lee Farm, what's now called Snap Farm, was William Brown's, with his tenant Richard Edwards actually running the farm. John Stone ran Lower Upham, which is over the hill and really in Chiseldon, but we won't give it to them. Upham itself was owned by a lady called Diana Caswell, the daughter of Timothy Caswell, who, as far as I can tell, never actually came anywhere within 50 miles of Upham. But she owned it and she rented it out to William Church, who was a local family of farmers. And then the smaller areas of enclosure, we've got various names. I'm not going to go through them. I know we've got people with connections to Snap here, so you might see a name that you recognize. There in Snap itself, and now in Woods End. Now there's a name there to remember, and that's down here, John Kemp. So remember the name John Kemp and where his cottage is, because we'll come across John Kemp again. Next time that we can look is 1841 and the census. And here we have, there is the village of Snap, and working out the direction in which the census enumerator must have walked. This is where I think the various families lived. We've got the Sayers, the Gileses, the Barretts, the Grants. Grant, somebody was showing me a Grant today. There we go. And the Coxheads and the Bates. So again, that's another name that's come up this evening. So there you are. There where the Grants and the Bates were, or appear to be from the census, if I've worked it out correctly. 1851. The Grants are still there. The Barretts are still there. The Bateses are still there. Coxheads are still there, but not quite as many as there were. There's now 41 people living in Snap. 1861, Grant's still there, and the Bates and the Coxheads, those three. Oh, the Grants now have two houses or two households in two halves of the same cottage by the look of it. The Bates as well have multiplied. 53 in the village now. (1871), the Grants are gone. They've moved on somewhere else, as have the Coxheads. The Bates are still there, now where the Grants used to be. And there are another name to remember are the Fishers, who've appeared down in the bottom corner cottage. 1881, again, the Fishers in the corner cottage, the Bateses where the Grants used to be, and so on. Now only 34 people living in the village. 91, and we're down to 29. 1900, we're down to 21. Gradually shrinking the population. Just the 6 cottages and a farmhouse now. That's all there are. Back in 61, the population was its maximum. And round about then, there were efforts made to improve the facilities, although the Methodist chapel actually dates further back than that. The Methodist chapel, not the most logical slide. There was a Methodist chapel. There was a Church of England Sunday school that was also used for service. And there was also a national school. And there's no sign of them there now. But if we look on the map there, you can see them marked in red. That could have gone a bit later. Back to the Methodist school, Methodist chapel. There'd first been a meeting house in 1798. In those days, if you wanted to have meetings as Methodists or Baptists or whatever denomination other than Church of England, you had to have a license or you had to register with the local diocese. And here's an entry, which there is too small for me to read. That's not going to get any bigger. And what this says, I'm going to have to try and read it. I can't really. My eyes are not as good as they were in 2017. But this basically is the request to use the house of John Kemp. I told you to remember John Kemp, to use his house as a meeting place for we dissenters from the Church of England, known as Methodists. And there's the list of them there. And I must admit, I was a bit surprised to find the name of Thomas Goddard as a Methodist, because the Goddards previously had been very staunch members of the local parish church. So at least one generation of Goddards was a rebel. Their meetings were so successful, they decided to build themselves a little chapel in 1845. And there is only one illustration of the chapel. There it was. There it was. No photograph, just somebody's sketch that was actually made when they were trying to sell it in 1906. But that's what the little chapel looked like just as you get round the corner at Wood's End going towards Ogbourne St George.
I think it was the chapel that was moved to Dugmore Lodge and has been renovated. It's still there.
Really?
Yeah, so I was told.
Oh, okay. Thank you, William. That's you sure it wasn't the church and school?
It could have been. If you're telling me this,
I'm not sure. I've not heard. It's possible, certainly.
Speak to Jonathan Melvin, he will give you the right.
Okay. Okay. Now, oh dear. The last recorded service in the Methodist chapel was in 1899. And here is the memorandum book or the minute book of the chapel. And it was written by Mr. Bates. And Mr. Bates tells us about what the state of the chapel is. And I'm conscious of the time. I'm not going to do my faux Wiltshire accent and try to read it all to you. But it's a wonderful little document because he is terribly keen to show how posh and well-read he is, or how well-read he is, and that he will not forget, he will not drop his H's. And so he puts an H in front of every word that starts with a vowel. So he does this and that. And lots of extra H's in it. It's just a wonderful little document. But I must rush on. The chapel was sold to Amos Black. No, you're not going to work, are you? I fixed you this morning. Sorry, this has gone strangely wrong. Go away. That's what it's supposed to look like. But this is a report from the local Methodist authority saying that yes, it's out of work, out of use, and it's falling into disrepair. And if we're not fast, the roof will fall in and it will just completely disappear. And by the way, there's a chap called Amos Black who's interested in buying it. The negotiations with Amos Black seem to have gone on for a long time because Amos wrote a very what's the word? A very frustrated letter saying, we've been talking about this for so long, and I've made you this offer, and here we are. This is the last time that I'm going to. Most I can offer you is £6 10 shillings for the chapel, which I want to buy, and actually in the end he paid £7 for it. But there was a dame school, schools now, and the church There was a dame school. One of the old ladies ran a little school for kids in 1813. And the Sunday school was suggested in 1839. What's going on? And it was started, first of all, in a converted cottage. And then a decision was made to actually build a Sunday school. And they charged William Butterfield, who had just designed the school here in the village and was about to redesign the chancel of the church. They asked him to design a school for Woodsend, and they collected money for it, and the whole thing cost £1,111. And according to this, they'd only managed to collect £990. So they needed to do a bit more fundraising. The vicar, William Cleather himself, had put £300 in. The school was thought to be quite useful up there, and then the vicar, George Cleather, George, not William, asked the bishop to license it for communion so that people didn't need in the winter to come 3 miles down for communion. So it was all thriving up there for about 30 years. And then it was closed in the late 1880s because it was so disused. It reopened for a few years after 1892. But by 1905, it was no longer in use and was falling into ruin. And it was sold and dismantled in 1913 because it had been built with public money. I have a problem with the first letter that you see is the letter from the National Schools Board saying it must be completely demolished and every stone must be removed. And certainly some of that stone seems to have been used to build that house in South Street, which would explain why there's a house in South Street with the stone trefoil frieze across the front. That we think that's probably come from the old Woodsend School. But I wonder if parts of it has gone to Dudmore. Could that be what you're talking about? It's the William?
Is Sid here?
Sorry?
Is Sid here?
Sid, no, not as far as I can see. I haven't seen it.
He would know too.
He would know.
Yeah, I think it was a building separate. It
was complete separate.
On the right hand side.
Okay. Right. So there are traces maybe of both of those buildings still. You're not supposed to be there. I've had problems. I've got 2 versions of this talk, and that's what's been happening to me. I got them mixed up. And that's really not very interesting. Right, it is. Those are graphs of the population, and you can see both of Snap and of Woodsend. In the last 20 years of the 19th century, the population dropped virtually to 0. Everybody had gone. Where did they go? Well, some of them came down to Aldbourne. Some went to other farms in the neighborhood. We've heard of somebody who went up to Upham. Some people went to Swindon or Reading and got involved in the factories or the railway and found completely different work. Some went further afield. James Fisher went to Patagonia. I've heard of another family. I've heard this evening of another family that went to Canada from SNAP. I wasn't aware of that. And three brothers, Robert, William, and Charles Coxhead, went to New Zealand. And the Coxhead family in New Zealand have done a great deal of research and come to the conclusion that everybody in New Zealand called Coxhead is descended from those three brothers that left SNAP in the 1840s through to the 1860s. And there's a complete family tree and some photographs of the family in the book over there, which is normally in the Heritage Centre reference works. The final act, the last person to leave SNAP. There weren't any lights for her to turn off. She was Rachel Fisher. But when did she leave? When did she leave? It never seemed to have been quite clear when. You read some sources and they say soon after 1905. The Aldbourne Chronicle tells us about 1909. Some people say 1913. So I decided to look into this. And the first place I looked was the 1911 census. Was anybody still in SNAP? And indeed there were. There were two families. The Smiths were in one house, two of them over 80 and with a son who was a bit younger. That was the Smiths. And there we are. There's the other side of that paper that shows you that that was in SNAP. And there were also James and Rachel Fisher, and they too were in their 80s. So there's 5 people living still in SNAP in 1911, 4 of whom are in their 80s, and the other one was in his late 50s. So basically, the place is dying. The Smith family seem to have left. Their burials are later. They didn't actually die in SNAP, so they've left. James and Rachel are left there on their own. There they are, the pair of them. There they are. We know that since Rachel was the last to be brought down, James must have died. And so I got hold of James's death certificate. And there it is. He died on the 18th of June, 1913. So remember that, 13th, 19th of June, 18th of June. Rachel is alone at SNAP. And she was brought down into the village. Brought down into the village by probably by one of Terry's forebears, Daniel Cook, I don't know if you noticed, Terry, but the informant for the death of James is Daniel. Daniel Cook. I don't. Could you hear that, Terry? No.
I was just thinking though, there's two great grandchildren there. Rachel Bishop here this evening.
Yes.
That's John Bishop's daughters. And Rachel is a family name, isn't it?
Yes. My niece is
Five daughters, Rachel, isn't it? Yeah.
Okay. What I was pointing out was,
Sorry.
I was pointing out on here that the informant of James's death was your forebear, Daniel Cook. Yes, which is where she was brought. But she didn't like it, did she? She didn't like it. It was much too quiet. She said that it was much too quiet down in the village, and she couldn't hear the foxes and the birds, and that's what she wanted. But there's no way she could not have lived up there on her own. So the 18th of June, James died. And then on the 12th of July, so less than a month later, the Daily Mirror reported on the deserted village of Snap and how the whole of the Wiltshire Downs had been turned into a huge ranch for cattle and sheep. And here I visited Snap Farmhouse. There were wells, cowsheds, pigsties, barns, orchards, lawns, quarters for maids and farm hands, everything necessary for running a successful farm. But the hush of desolation hung over the place. One was rather glad to get out of the nettles and the silence back onto the high road. So, and that article included some photographs of Snap. And here we are. Here are two houses, two of the cottages, almost surrounded by shoulder-high grass. Here is the chapel up at Wood's End, and here is stables which Amos Black built and that he mentioned in that letter that he wrote. And what we realized when we blew it up is that just here, you can see the triangle of the gable of the roof. This is the only image that we've ever seen or ever found of that Sunday school come church at Wood's End. That's the best there is. And you can see that it's flint, and you can see that there are bands of brick to stabilize the flint walls. And this is the family that lived in the house that had been the chapel. And blow me, I bet you this is Amos Black and his family. In fact, the article in the newspaper actually names the family as being the Black family. What had happened? Well, in the late 19th century, America expanded into the prairie and turned it into wheat production. And wheat production flooded the world market with American wheat, which was cheap. Marginal wheatland, marginal agricultural land, like up on the Downs, became uneconomic to run, unviable to run. You could not make enough money. It took too many men. And so farms went out of business, left, right, and centre, all across southern England. And along comes Henry Wilson, and he buys up cheap farms, as you would, realizes that he can't continue them as arable farms, and install sheep. You only need one shepherd to 1,000 sheep, or whatever, roaming over the countryside. Here is Henry Wilson. Go away. In 1905, he buys Snap Farm. First of all, he bought Lee. Now he's bought Snap Farm. And again, he ends arable farming, turns it over to sheep. Many fewer workers are required for the sheep farming. And then we get the deserted village reported in the Daily Mirror. On the back of which this gentleman, Richard Cornthwaite Lambert, who's MP for Cricklade, makes a very inflammatory speech at Wootton Bassett about the loss of agricultural farming or arable farming, and in particular, demonizing Henry Wilson. It's reported very widely in the newspapers, his speech. The Daily Express send their own reporter to Snap and to Hungerford Market. And here is their front page article on basically saying it's not as bad. And they talk to Henry Wilson's son. And another radical land bubble. And he basically blames Cornthwaite Lambert for rabble rousing, effectively. That's all very political, in that the Lambert was a liberal and the Daily Express was a conservative paper. Anyway, 6th of September 1913, Mr. Lambert is sued by Henry Wilson's sons. And the first time I gave this talk, at the end of it, one of his grandsons stood up and actually presented me with copies of some of the documents from the legal case, which is where that image there has come from. It went on for 2 days in Bristol, reported each day in the newspapers. And at the end, they seem to have found Lambert guilty of slander, but he didn't mean any harm. There was no intent to harm, but they do order Lambert to pay the costs. He wasn't fined or punished, but he did have to pay all of the costs. very strange outcome. So what then happened? It was used for army training, and then it was left to decay. And here it is, that's Snap Farmhouse in about 1930, all that had left of the two chimneys. There's a field, a house platform, just a pile of rubble is all that's left in the 1990s, which is when I took these photos. One of the house platforms was being used as an equestrian eventing obstacle. And there were sherds of pottery, as you'll see over there. In the late 1990s, a teacher at Tothill School in Swindon got interested in Snap, and that's the gentleman on the right there with the glasses. And he used the history of Snap as a project for the kids in his class. And at the end of the project, they decided that they would put a little memorial. And so they laid a stone there in memory of the people of Snap from the pupils of Tothill School. And it was unveiled. The gentleman in the grey jacket leaning on the back of the stone, that's Johnny Fisher. He was born in Patagonia, came back to Aldbourne in, I'm not sure, the 1920s, 1930s, and lived in Aldbourne again then for the rest of his life. And earlier this evening, somebody was talking about Clive, his son, and that's Clive, who's becoming phonically challenged there next to his father. That's Clive.
John, that's Sally and Anita, his daughters.
You're Clive's daughters?
Oh,
Sisters.
Sorry.
Clive built the extension to our house. And that's all I have to say. I'd like to acknowledge the work a lot of this is based on work that was done by Kenneth Watts, who wrote a wonderful monograph on Snap, which there's a copy over there. They're like hen's teeth, please don't pinch it. Anne Sanford from New Zealand, who's one of the group of people who put together the full history of the Coxhead family in New Zealand, who just happens to be my sixth cousin, a completely different family. Jo Hutchins, I haven't seen Jo this evening, but she shares so much of her knowledge that a lot of her knowledge went into the first of these talks. And Cassie, who's done a lot of work recently, that's brought us, amongst other things, the fact that Snap was talked about 50 years earlier than we thought it was. Members and villagers, all of you, people come up to me and tell me stories and give me facts and give me ideas and encouragement. And lastly, to Liz for all of that and putting up with me. And that's all I have. I'm finished, Terry. Oh, yeah.
Thanks very much, John. Thanks so much for that. And it's lovely to see so many of you here tonight who are obviously really interested in Snap. And we have a huge interest in Snap as a heritage group. I mean, it's in the village, in the parish of Aldbourne, so we should have that interest. And David Robinson over in the corner there, who's just put his hand up. As I said, he lives at Woods End and he probably knows as much about Snap that we don't know about as anybody.
As it is today.
And he would